The sun was already high over Luke Air Force Base when Evelyn Rhodes stepped out of the unmarked sedan and walked toward the restricted hangar. Her boots crunched across the concrete. Not hurried, not slow, just steady. A plain canvas bag was slung over one shoulder. She wore jeans, a faded gray button-up, and a ball cap with no insignia. No ID badge dangled from her collar. No rank, no patches. Nothing that said she belonged there. Inside the hangar, a group of Air Force personnel stood in loose formation near an F-16C. Most were pilots and weapons officers, chatting casually before the briefing began. One of them turned as Evelyn entered. He narrowed his eyes, looked her up and down, then turned back to the others with a smirk. Someone muttered, "Who let the tourist in?" Lieutenant Jack Rayner, tall, clean-shaven, and radiating the kind of cocky confidence that only came from 1,000 hours in the air, stepped forward. His voice was relaxed, almost friendly. "Ma'am, if you're looking for the museum tour, it's back through the gate. They don't usually start until 10:30 a.m. Evelyn didn't respond. She kept walking, her eyes scanning the space, noting every detail. She stopped a few feet from the planning table, set down her bag, and pulled out a compact anemometer, a tablet, and a well-worn notebook. Rayner raised an eyebrow. "All right. You're clearly very determined. You mind telling us what you're doing in a restricted zone?" Another officer, younger, leaned in and whispered, "Maybe she's logistics." "Nah," Rayner said with a laugh. "Logistics folks don't carry wind sensors." The room chuckled. No one moved to stop her, but no one welcomed her either. The air shifted when the door at the far end opened and Colonel Monroe entered. He didn't look surprised to see her. He walked straight toward Evelyn and nodded once. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice sharp and measured, "meet Evelyn Rhodes. She's a civilian advisor from DARPA, here on direct request. She'll be supporting our targeting operations and evaluating long-range variables during upcoming training." The silence hit hard. Someone cleared their throat. Another stepped back. Rayner blinked. "DARPA, seriously." Monroe looked at him. "Do you have a problem with that, Lieutenant?" "No, sir," Rayner said quickly, though his voice had lost some of its usual edge. Monroe turned back to Evelyn. "You need anything else?" She shook her head. "No, this will do." Rayner folded his arms and gave her a long look. "So what exactly is it you do, Miss Rhodes?" She flipped open the notebook and glanced at the readings from her anemometer. "I calculate wind drift, temperature gradients, atmospheric interference. I find the equation no one else sees." Rayner scoffed. "Yeah, and what good is all that without experience?" Her voice was calm. "Experience tells you where to aim. I tell you where the bullet will land." There was no boast in her tone, just fact, the kind that couldn't be argued. The colonel gave a satisfied nod. "She knows more about ballistics than any of us. If you're smart, you'll pay attention." The group fell quiet. Even Rayner looked uncertain now. Evelyn returned to her notes. Focused. Detached. She wasn't here to prove anything. She'd already done that years ago. They just didn't know it yet. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then someone walked past her, a little slower than necessary, eyes lingering. She didn't notice. Or maybe she just didn't care. Outside the hangar, the engines of a nearby A-10 Thunderbolt II started to spool up. Inside, Evelyn was already making calculations based on the crosswind generated by its taxi path. No one else in the room had even thought about it. She closed her notebook, looked up, and met Rayner's gaze. Her expression didn't change. "You don't have to like me, Lieutenant," she said. "You just have to let me help you survive." Then she turned back to her gear. Her presence didn't demand attention. It commanded it. She was 22 when they found her. Not through recruiters or officer training programs, but through a math competition she never entered. Evelyn Rhodes had been solving fluid dynamics problems for fun when a civilian advisor from Wright-Patterson handed her a plain white card and said someone needed to talk to her. She thought it was a mistake, but she showed up anyway. A week later, she was flown to a secure facility in Nevada and given a single sheet of paper. On it were 4 bullet trajectory problems involving crosswind, spin drift, temperature, and altitude. She solved them in her head in under a minute. Project Sandglass wasn't listed anywhere. There were no briefing packets, no chain of command, no insignia. Just 6 recruits, hand-picked for their ability to think beyond machines. Evelyn stood out immediately. The others used notebooks, sometimes calculators. She stared at the target and ran the math in real time, adjusting for over 20 environmental variables: wind layers, barometric pressure, earth curvature, bullet mass, muzzle velocity. She didn't need help. She needed silence. The training was brutal, not physically, like special operations selection, but mentally. Sleep cycles were broken into segments to test cognition under fatigue. Firing ranges were placed in mountain terrain to introduce unstable winds. She fired over 500 rounds a day. Most of them weren't about hitting a target. They were about understanding why the bullet missed. They called her Subject Echo. Each day began at 04:30 and ended only when her instructors were satisfied. She never complained. Not when the rifles jammed. Not when the night cold cut through her gear. Not when they started running neuromonitoring tests to measure her brain's firing rate. She let them wire her up, watch her heart rate, monitor her glucose. She gave them everything. At her peak, Evelyn could hit a steel plate at 3,000 yards within a 6-inch grouping under shifting wind conditions. That number meant nothing to most people. But for her instructors, it was beyond doctrine. She wasn't shooting with guesses or instinct. She was processing chaos in real time and turning it into order. Then the funding dried up. DARPA shifted its focus to drones, AI, and kinetic kill satellites. Human factors were labeled inefficient. Sandglass was cut without warning. One afternoon, Evelyn was pulled aside, told her clearance had been deactivated, and handed a packet with civilian transition resources. No debrief, no thank you. Just silence, like she had never existed. She spent the next year in a fog. Then she took a position at Northern Arizona University, teaching theoretical ballistics to undergraduates who had never held a rifle. She spoke softly, moved slowly, and answered questions with the kind of clarity that left her students quiet. None of them knew where she had been. Most of them thought she had come from a tech firm. Her apartment was small, sparse. Her rifles were locked away in a case she rarely opened, but she still ran equations in her head when she drove, or when a flag fluttered in the wind, or when someone sneezed and she saw the air ripple. Some things didn't leave you, even when the world did. Years passed. One by one, the memories settled into the background. She stopped wondering what happened to the others in the program. She figured most had failed the way the system expected. Quietly, efficiently. She was the only one who had survived the entire evaluation cycle. Not because she was stronger, because she never tried to prove anything. Then, one day, at exactly 10:40 a.m., she received an encrypted email with a return address from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The subject line was one word: Echo. She sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the screen, heart completely still. For the first time in years, the numbers began to stir again. The message was short: high-value target, improbable trajectory, computer failure, human solution required. It didn't say her name. It didn't need to. She knew what it meant. They needed the girl they built and abandoned, the one who never missed. She stood up, walked to the small gun safe in the corner of her apartment, and placed her hand on the keypad. She didn't open it. Not yet. But something shifted. For all the pain and resentment and years of silence, part of her still remembered what it felt like to matter, what it meant to be trusted with something no one else could do. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was the recognition of purpose. And that was enough to make her turn back toward the past. They didn't deserve her. Not really. But someone out there needed her to make one shot count. So she packed her bag, closed the apartment door, and left without saying a word. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not anymore. They gathered in a low-ceilinged briefing room inside the hardened operations building. The lights were dimmed, and a digital display filled the far wall. Evelyn sat at the corner of the long table, silent, her canvas bag resting near her feet. The others were uniformed. She wasn't. No one introduced her. But everyone knew who she was now. Colonel Monroe stood near the screen. At exactly 1300 hours, he said. ISR confirmed visual on HVT Echo Black in the northern slope sector of Passaband Valley. He tapped a pointer at the satellite photo. Compound sits at 8,400 feet elevation. Surrounded by natural terrain shielding and complex thermal layers, he shifted to the next slide. All current AI trajectory models fail beyond 2,200 yards due to unstable vectors. Lieutenant Rayner spoke from across the table. So the shot's off the table. Right. Negative. Monroe looked at Evelyn. The task force wants options. She leaned forward, scanning the imagery. The terrain was rugged. High ridges, open plateaus, narrow approach routes. The valley acted like a pressure tunnel, shifting wind patterns by the hour. Layers of conflicting temperature zones distorted visibility and velocity. It was a nightmare for ballistics. Evelyn reached into her bag, pulled out a small pad, and began writing. Her hand moved in smooth arcs. Numbers, symbols, corrections. Then she stopped. "What's the estimated distance from viable high ground to target balcony?" she asked without lifting her eyes. Monroe answered, 2.87 miles, almost 15,000 feet. She nodded slightly. "What's the forecast for ZO 7:30 local time?" Staff Sergeant from the weather cell answered, "Prevailing winds from northwest, 10 knots average, gusts up to 15, variable shear above 7,000 feet, intermittent thermal inversion pockets expected." She ran another quick series of values. Target is on an eastern-facing terrace. Sunlight will cause updrafts by 0723. That shifts the entire wind profile 4 degrees off baseline. Rayner shook his head. Even if she's right, there's no way to account for that in a ballistic system. "That's correct. Evelyn said, a system can't, I can..." The room went quiet. Monroe folded his arms. "You're telling me you can generate a firing solution that computers can't?" "Yes." "How long would you need to prepare?" "Less than 6 hours for location and calibration, 1 hour for setup." "And the shot?" "1 breath, 1 trigger pull." She wasn't bragging. Her voice didn't rise. There was no drama in it. Just certainty. She closed the notebook and looked directly at the colonel. "If you want a solution, I'm it. If not, I'll walk out right now. Either way, the math doesn't care." Monroe didn't hesitate. "You'll have what you need." Evelyn nodded once, then stood. Her bag came up smoothly in her hand. As she left the room, no one spoke. She didn't have to prove anything. She had already done the math. The air in the tactical prep room felt tight. It wasn't the space itself. It was the way no one said anything when Evelyn walked in. SEAL Team 11 stood grouped near the weapons racks, checking gear, loading mags, confirming frequencies. No one looked at her directly, but they didn't ignore her either. It was the kind of silence you got when people had already made up their minds. Lieutenant Jack Rayner adjusted the sling on his M4 and walked over, arms crossed. "So, this is who we're babysitting." Colonel Monroe, standing nearby, didn't flinch. "Evelyn Rhodes, civilian ballistics advisor. She'll be embedded with your team through mission completion. Your job is to get her in, let her take the shot, and get her out." Rayner gave a tight nod but never took his eyes off her. "We run high-risk insertions, recon, overwatch, extraction. We don't usually carry civilians." Evelyn's voice was calm. "You're not carrying me. Lieutenant, you're protecting the only person who can make the shot your systems can't." One of the team snorted behind him. Another muttered something under his breath. Evelyn didn't react. She stepped toward the gear table and began unpacking her case. A sleek, matte black Chaytak M200 intervention sat nestled in custom foam. She checked each part with silent precision. Rayner watched her. Tone still clipped. You ever walk 12 miles through mountain terrain with full ruck and zero light? Yes. He didn't expect that. You do realize there's no backup shooter. If you freeze or miss, the target walks. I won't freeze, and I don't miss. What if things go sideways? Then you protect the one person who's not replaceable. That's your job. The team shifted slightly. A few eyes met hers now. Not with trust, just curiosity. She didn't demand their respect. She wasn't trying to win them over. I'm not here to be liked, Evelyn said, still inspecting the bolt assembly. I'm here to make the shot that no one else can. I need you to get me to that ridge. That's it. Rayner ran a hand along his jaw, then nodded once. Extraction plans being adjusted based on new terrain modeling. You'll carry your own load. You fall behind. We keep moving. You get spotted. You stay down. Understood. Colonel Monroe stepped in. She knows what she's doing. Rayner, treat her like you would anyone else on your team. She's not the backup plan. She is the plan. Rayner hesitated, then finally said, We step off at 0400. Hope you're not one of those civilians who needs coffee before functioning. I don't drink coffee, Evelyn replied. Just solve problems. That earned a look. Not quite respect. Not yet. But something shifted. Small. Enough. As they went back to their gear, Evelyn stayed where she was. Quiet. Ready. She didn't need them to like her. She only needed them to follow orders and survive long enough for her to do what no one else could. The range stretched flat and quiet across the Arizona desert. Heat shimmered above the gravel. Beyond the last set of markers, a steel target the size of a standard torso silhouette stood bolted to a concrete base at exactly 200 yards. It was barely visible without optics. Wind flagged lightly at the markers, gusting just enough to matter. SEAL Team 11 was already prone, rifles aligned. Their spotter called corrections in clipped tones. First shooter was Diaz. He fired. The shot kicked dust a full foot off the target's left shoulder. Rayner, next in line, made a minor wind correction and squeezed. His round dropped low, clipping a pebble and skipping out of frame. 3 more shooters followed. All missed. They reset and tried again. Small adjustments, breathing control, spotter updates, same result. 7 shots, 7 misses. Rayner rolled onto his back, pulled off his ear protection, and exhaled. Not like we'll be pulling that off in theater anyway. The others laughed. Not mocking, just resigned. The conditions were fair, but the range was extreme. Even with good data, it was a shot most didn't bother training for. Too improbable. No one noticed Evelyn at first. She had been sitting quietly under the shade cover, reviewing telemetry from a portable sensor kit. She stood, walked over without a word, and picked up Rayner's MRAD from its bipod cradle. The laughter died off quick. You sure you want that? Rayner asked. Muzzle brakes aggressive, scopes zeroed for my eyes. Evelyn didn't respond. She adjusted the scope 3 clicks left, 2 down. Her hands moved smoothly, like she'd done it 1,000 times. She went prone, set the stock into her shoulder, and stilled. The range fell silent. Wind, 9 knots from the southwest, temperature at ground level 86. Barrel temp cold. Ammo custom loaded, 338 Lapua, 285 grain. She took a breath, eyes fixed through the glass, trigger pressure even and steady. Then she fired. The rifle barked, recoil kicked back hard, but her position didn't shift. Through the scope, the spotter saw the steel plate jump with a metallic thump. Dead center. No edge, no wobble. Direct hit. No one said anything. Not right away. Finally, the spotter lowered his binoculars. Impact. Center mass. Confirmed. Diaz blinked. You see that wasn't luck. She stood, cleared the chamber, and laid the rifle back on the cradle. Her expression didn't change. No smile, no nod. Just stillness. Rayner walked over. Slower this time. That shot wasn't even close to how far off we were. How'd you know? Evelyn looked at the range, then at him. You were calculating distance and elevation. I was calculating wind shear over terrain at mid-morning, the breeze coming off that ridgeline. It throws you around 5 inches right if you're not compensating for thermal lift. He stared at her. And you figured all that out without checking anything. I did check an hour ago. The team stood silent. No one cracked a joke. No one reached for another rifle. Evelyn turned back toward her gear. She didn't need praise. She'd already hit what no one else could. That was enough. As she walked off the range, Raynor said quietly, "That wasn't a shot. That was control." She didn't respond. She just kept walking. The Black Hawk dropped them just after 2100 hours, 5 kilometers east of the valley. No lights, no chatter, just the sound of rotors fading into the darkness as the bird lifted off and vanished behind the ridgeline. SEAL Team 11 moved quickly, checking weapons, confirming routes. Evelyn was already down on one knee, opening her compact sensor kit and scanning for temperature and barometric pressure. Wind at 5 knots, shifted from southwest to west-southwest over the last 40 minutes. Barometric pressure rising. The night air was dry and sharp, perfect for long-range visibility, but unpredictable near rock faces. She logged it all mentally. They had 9 miles to cover, mostly uphill. The terrain was rough, loose rock, patches of dry brush, narrow switchbacks. The team moved in staggered column, Raynor on point, Evelyn 2 positions from the rear. Her rifle was broken down inside a low-profile pack. She carried her own weight, made no sound, and never asked for help. Every 30 minutes, she recalibrated wind shear and altitude change, matching local readings against memory. No instrument buzzed, no screen glowed, just a quiet cycle of measure and store. At EU 045, they halted along a slope with partial cover. Raynor held up a closed fist, then pointed, ahead, through night optics. Movement shimmered slow, deliberate. 6 figures posted along a high ridge that overlapped their planned route. Local militia, armed, scanning, downhill. Nothing about it was random. "They're blocking the saddle," Raynor muttered. Evelyn stepped forward, scanning the terrain. Straight engagement meant exposure. Evasion meant delay. "There's a narrow wash to the east," she said. "Elevation drops manageable. We'll stay in shadow for the first 70 meters, but they'll have line of sight near the bend." "And if they spot us," Diaz asked. "They won't," she answered, "if they're looking the other way." Raynor turned to her. "How?" She was already pulling her rifle case off her shoulder. "There's a bluff to the west. Exposed shale bank, 20 meters across. 1 shot, controlled rockfall. Sound bounces off the ridge and draws their line of attention." He watched her as she pieced the rifle together. No hesitation, no wasted motion. She laid prone against a natural crease in the terrain and eyed the bluff. Distance 762 yards. Wind cross breeze from left. Target a loose outcrop along the ridge's top third. She fired. The suppressor muted the sound to a sharp cough. 2 seconds later, a rumble echoed across the basin. Stones and dust tumbled from the bluff. The distant figures turned as one, weapons raised, scanning toward the noise. "Go," Evelyn said without looking up. The team moved fast through the wash, crouched low. No one spoke. By the time they reached the bend, the bluff was still shifting and echoing. The patrol never saw them pass. Once they cleared the line of sight, Raynor looked back at her. "Nice call." She didn't respond. She was already recalculating wind layers, checking the horizon. The shot had been just right. Enough chaos to distract. Not enough to collapse the ridge. It wasn't instinct. It was math. She hoisted her rifle and followed the team. The mountains weren't forgiving, but neither was she. The ridge was cold. Thin air whispered across the stone, brushing past Evelyn's cheek as she settled into prone position. Her rifle was already assembled, calibrated, resting on its bipod like an extension of her breath. The world below was asleep. Lights in the valley were dim, sparse, unaware of what waited in silence above. She checked her data again. Distance 2.87 miles. Target elevation 8,400 feet. Time 07:17. First light had begun to bleed into the sky, a pale gray cast brushing the peaks in the east. Her right eye stayed on the glass, The scope trained on a terrace just beyond a sloped rooftop. The wind moved in layers, shallow at first, then curling between the rock faces like fingers through thread. Barometric pressure was dropping, humidity low. The sun hadn't crested yet, but it was close. And when it did, thermals would shift. She had 4 minutes, maybe 5, before the variables changed. She breathed, not slowly, not fast, just evenly. The kind of breath you draw when you know there's only one shot and no margin. She watched her target step onto the terrace, a man in a dark vest, holding a steaming mug, shoulders relaxed. She ran the final numbers. Wind 6 knots, gusting to 9, temp at altitude 47 degrees, spin drift right bias at this range, Coriolis measurable shift, adjusted. She didn't think, she didn't blink. She just felt the math click into place. Then, one controlled exhale, trigger press, silence. The recoil was clean. The shot vanished downrange, swallowed by space and time and gravity. For 4 seconds, there was nothing. Then the target dropped. No stumble, no warning. One motion. Down. Her spotter whispered, "Confirmed." She didn't react. She didn't smile. She just lifted her head and looked past the scope, toward the horizon now warming with light. In the distance, alarms began to sound. The compound stirred, but the moment was already sealed. It was done. One shot, one solution. And no one else could have made it. The shot had barely echoed down the valley before the alarms began. SEAL Team 11 didn't wait. Raynor gave the order, and they moved. Evelyn packed fast, breaking down her rifle in under 30 seconds. No wasted motion. Every man knew what came next. Kill confirmed meant enemy. Response was minutes away. Maybe less. They left the ridge just before 0740. The descent was steep, and their original extraction point callsign Alpha was now compromised. Raynor checked his comms. UAVs were already in the air, grid scanning in sweeps. Evelyn adjusted her pack and kept pace, her eyes constantly scanning the sky. "We need shadow cover," she said. "There's a cloud layer tracking east. If we time it, we can ride the shadow corridor down the slope." Raynor nodded. "How long?" 17 minutes. Coverage will last less than 5. They moved fast to the edge of the saddle and waited. Evelyn watched the clouds, her face calm. At exactly 0757, she said, "Now." The team crossed the exposed slope under shifting shade. Drones passed overhead, their sensors unable to track through the temporary contrast shift. No one spoke. Every footfall was calculated. At the tree line, they stopped to regroup. "Alpha's out," Raynor said. "UAVs have it bracketed. Monroe confirmed it. They're expecting us there." "We shift to Bravo," Diaz said, but his voice wasn't confident. "They'll anticipate that too," Evelyn replied. "We need to create uncertainty." "How?" "Ambush up ahead," she said. 4-man team, concealed north side of the clearing, watching for movement, not noise. "You sure?" Raynor asked. She nodded. "Geometry's wrong. Disturbance patterns in the brush don't match natural wind." "So we go around?" "No, we make them react." Evelyn dropped to one knee, pulled her rifle free, and sighted east away from the ambush site. She calculated a near miss, high-impact echo, one shot, far enough to draw fire, close enough to sound real. "You hit anyone?" "Not unless they moved since this morning." She fired. The round snapped through the trees and struck a dead log with a crack loud enough to bounce off the rock face. The ambush team returned fire instantly toward the east. "Move!" Raynor barked. The SEALs hit the perimeter. 2 flanked wide, 2 took the high edge. It took seconds. Return fire was precise. 4 targets down. No friendly rounds spent. Evelyn reloaded and kept moving. The team diverted north, skirting thermal coverage zones and keeping beneath the drone flight paths. By 0832, they reached a ravine that led toward the new LZ. Monroe's voice came through the radio. "Bravo is viable. Blackhawks en route. ETA 6 minutes." "Helicopter inbound," Raynor said. "We move now." They double-timed through the ravine, pace tight but coordinated. Evelyn counted heartbeats between her steps, matching her breathing to her forward momentum. Just before the clearing, she paused. "What now?" Rayner asked. "Something's off." She scanned. The brush was undisturbed. Too neat. The silence too perfect. She knelt, picked up a small stone, and rolled it ahead. Nothing. Then she raised her rifle and fired again. This time, not a distraction. A warning. A single man stepped out, then dropped. One more, then nothing. Rayner waved the team forward. The rest of the clearing held. At 08:38, the sound of rotor blades cut through the air. The Black Hawk appeared from the south, fast and low. They popped the infrared beacon. The bird flared, hovered, and dropped to the dirt. "Go," Rayner ordered. The team boarded fast. Evelyn climbed in last, her rifle across her chest. As they lifted off, rounds hit the tree line below. Return fire sprayed from the crew chief's position, but they were clear. Evelyn sat back against the wall, eyes closed for just a second. She heard Rayner across the comm say, "Package secure." The mission was complete. The math had held, and for once, the escape had too. The debrief room was cold, sterile, and windowless. Evelyn sat alone at the table, hands folded, her gear already turned in. Across from her, two officials in suits asked the same questions she'd heard before. Trajectory variance, wind correction, time to target. They wanted numbers. They wanted to know how she did it without support, without systems. She answered quietly, without emotion. They didn't understand that most of the work had already been done before sunrise. By 10:05, she was cleared to leave. Her escort walked her to a small airfield building near the flight line. A transport plane waited outside, engines turning slowly. Colonel Monroe stood by the ramp, arms behind his back. His posture was stiff, but his voice was level. "Pentagon's impressed. They're ready to restart Sandglass, with you at the center." Evelyn nodded once but didn't respond. He continued, "We're offering full clearance, advisory rank, your own lab, research, training, whatever you want. The work would be yours to direct. And if I say no, then I lose the best asset I've ever seen. But you walk away free, no strings." Evelyn looked past him, toward the hangars. She didn't need time to think. She already knew her answer. Before she could speak, footsteps approached from behind. She turned slightly. Rayner stood there, his uniform dusty, face still marked with dried sweat. He stopped a few feet away, eyes steady. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not for doubting the math, for doubting you." She held his gaze. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "But maybe next time a woman walks into your world, don't assume she doesn't belong." Rayner nodded, quiet. "You saved us. More than once. I didn't do it for you." He smiled. "Just barely. I know. That's what makes it matter." Monroe cleared his throat. Not rushing, just reminding them time was moving. Evelyn turned to the ramp, her bag slung over one shoulder. She paused. "One condition," she said. "If I come back, I set the terms. I choose where and when. No more disappearing when I'm no longer useful." "Agreed," Monroe said without hesitation. She didn't shake hands, she just boarded. Inside the aircraft, she settled into the seat, eyes closing briefly as the engine spun up. Outside the window, Rayner stood still, not looking away this time. As the plane lifted off, Evelyn felt no weight in her chest, no regret. She wasn't returning to what she had lost. She was stepping toward what she'd never been allowed to claim. This time, it was hers, her choice, her rules, and no one would ever take that from her again.